Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of One Piece a Day. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of One Piece a Day. Hey everyone, and welcome to the first anniversary of One Piece a Day. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of One Piece a Day. Hey everyone, and welcome to the channel. It is an interesting video today, and you can probably see in the title what this is about. So, first things first, I have caught up to One Piece, all 1,142 chapters of it as of recording. And it's kind of cool to be up to date. It's wild. I never really thought I'd be here in this sort of sense. Like, I thought I would end up reading ahead. I thought I might possibly drop it. But I stayed the course and read literally one chapter every single day, even if a cliffhanger was annoying, even if an arc frustrated me, just through all the good and bad of One Piece, because it is by no means perfect, but its highs are really high and its lows are kind of middling. Anyway, the other thing in this video that you probably saw is I have quit my job. Now, this is in no way related to the One Piece a Day thing, just so happened to coincide with this. Not going to say where I worked or anything like that, but it was a place I stayed at for 10 years. Really enjoyed my time there, and it's just a moment that I need to move on. I'm getting a little bit older, and I kind of need a change of scenery, and I think that now is the time. I used to joke about a year or so ago with a coworker about me leaving as the second I catch up to One Piece, and this was not planned at all. It just so happened to happen pretty much within the same week of me catching up to One Piece that I'll also be leaving. And that was kind of wacky, but it worked out that way, and I loved all the people I worked with. I loved the job itself, but it really is just time to move on. And I guess that's enough about that. In this video, we are here to talk about One Piece. So, I haven't really done an update video about One Piece in quite some time. The last one that I did was meant to be a Q&A video where I opened it up for people to respond and send questions. I didn't really get any, so I just sort of stopped doing the updates. And a lot of the reason why I stopped doing the updates as well is because I was just talking about the same things over and over and over again, because my opinions of the series didn't really change that much. My favorite characters didn't really change that much. True, I could have chosen more interesting topics to talk about to make those videos more interesting, but I also needed a little bit of engagement to help me figure out what it was that I needed to do differently. But it is what it is. I just couldn't think of what to do for that video series, so I stopped talking about it around Dressrosa, I think. So I didn't talk about Whole Cake, didn't talk about Wano or anything like that. And now, finished Egghead, and I'm well on my way, in Elbaf, seeing everything unfold with everyone else, which is pretty cool. But I think I should talk about the experiment overall and what I thought of it. Generally, I want to keep this video short because it is incredibly hot today and my studio lights are burning me alive, as you can probably see. I am melting right now. But the thoughts on the experiment in general. So reading one chapter of One Piece every single day until you catch up, I do genuinely think it's a pretty good way to get into One Piece, or at least limiting how much of a series you absorb every single day. It sort of makes the material a little bit more important. You don't feel like you're rushing it, you're not glazing over certain parts of it, you're focusing on those 20 to 30 pages every single day, and you just go through the journey at your own pace. And it's something that you can easily do. It takes up 5-10 minutes of a day, depending on how much you're reading. And I thought it was generally a pretty good way to get into a series, especially a very long-running series like this. And it sort of helped me understand the growth of Oda as an author, every character in the Straw Hat crew as characters, and just really get a feel for everything. I don't think I would have cried at certain sequences nearly as hard if I was just marathoning the whole thing, because I would have missed a lot of that nuance. And I think just limiting yourself to a certain amount of the material every single day, or every single time you sit down with the content, it's an interesting way to handle it all. Like, you might not be reading one chapter a day, you might be reading several chapters a day, you might not be reading every single day, you might be reading every single week. But whatever it was an interesting pace to absorb such a large series, and I would recommend that for not just One Piece, but realistically any long-running series that has a long journey that you can follow from start to finish and is initially daunting like One Piece. Now, what I think of the series as a whole, generally speaking, One Piece is absolutely fantastic. It is an all-timer, and I think everyone understands that as they read it or watch it. It is very clear it will be an instant classic when it does eventually finish. And I mean, it's already, like, the anime is over 25 years old. Like, it's basically classic as is. But it is something special. It's not perfect by any means, and I think that's one of the most important things to talk about for One Piece. It is not a perfect series. It is flawed like every other series. It has boring moments. It has arcs that don't really land. It has characters that don't really work that well. And as the series progresses, some of the flaws do become a little bit more apparent, but overall, it doesn't really matter because of the core focus of the narrative being as strong as it is. Now, the stuff that isn't so good about One Piece are like some of those smaller arcs that just feel like they're there to tread water, so to speak. So your Foxy Pirates, your Fishman Island. While you might get some kernels of really good exposition in it, like in particular the end of Fishman Island and the overarching story of the Fishmen people, like characters like Hody Jones as a villain, just don't really work too well. Like, they just work as sort of like villain of the week. Even to some extent, some of the best arcs in the entire series, like Enies Lobby, which had some really strong characters, incredible character moments, and great development overall, has possibly one of the most boring villains or antagonists, because you've got Rob Lucci, who on paper seems like he'd be a really good villain, but we know practically nothing about him, and he's just like an antagonist for the sake of being an antagonist. And I don't think it works, especially when they bring him back in Egghead. Yes, it's cool having the fight and everything like that, but you're telling me this random guy that we know nothing about that awakened his fruit can fight almost on par with Luffy, who had just fought Kaido, who was an emperor and had all these years to be like the greatest pirate ever. And this just random guy, after he awakens, is like on par with Luffy, and we still don't really know that much about him as a character besides, I work for the government and I'm strong. Like, some characters just don't work that well, and that also leads into my biggest criticism of One Piece as a whole, and it comes because so many of the other things are so good in the series. So my biggest criticism of One Piece is that there's not enough time to learn and let a lot of these characters shine or breathe. So, like, the Straw Hats, pretty focused group. We learned a lot about them pre-time skip and some post-time skip, but for the most part, all of the character development happened pre-time skip, and we know who they are, we know what they stand for, and we solidly know those characters in and out, especially with some of the later arcs. But because One Piece is drawn in the way it is, done in the way it is, almost every single character you see in the series that is a named character is bombastic, has incredible energy, is almost a show stealer, and things like that, and you get no time with them. So you might have an arc where you've got a character that you kind of like, and every time they're on screen you really, really like them, but you never really learn that much about them. There are certain characters where that is not true, but for the most part there's a lot of characters where you're like, I'd like to know more about them, but we just don't have the time. I think a really good example of what I'm talking about is a lot of the parts of Whole Cake Island, because for the most part it was Sanji's arc and Luffy's arc, and we got to see bits and pieces of other characters throughout, like Reiju, Big Mom, and they're good, and we learn a decent amount about them, enough to know that, oh, I like this character or not. Don't learn a whole lot about Sanji's family. I guess like a lot of their personalities are just like, I'm mean and I don't like Sanji. But then there's all of Big Mom's kids. We only really learn about one of them, but there's so many of them that show up for like a scene or two. And that's it. and they've got these elaborate, really cool designs, might even have really, really cool powers, but we don't see them beyond like their initial introduction and maybe like a few panels here or there, or like one moment in a fight. And that's my problem with One Piece in general, is that there's just so many big personalities that a lot of the smaller ones get completely drowned out, and it really is, we just don't have enough time to handle all of this. It's almost a fault of Oda's own incredible style of just having so much imagination and so many ideas firing off all at once, that he has some really good ones that we wish he could hold on to just a little bit longer, but he just can't. Or at least that's my opinion, that's how I feel about One Piece. You get some really, really cool characters, and you do learn about a lot of the really, really cool characters, but sometimes it's just too much. And realistically, there's also just too many characters to keep track of. And it is impressive, honestly, how many are still memorable, even if they are only in one arc or a couple of scenes. It is really, really impressive that they can hold your attention that long. And it's a criticism, but there is an edge of like praise in there as well. It's just one of the things I noticed after reading all of One Piece, is just that sometimes I'd like to know more about certain characters, but I know we probably won't. And look, those start of chapter little shot panels, that would be pretty good to introduce stuff like that. I do also understand that the way they structure arcs is usually you'll finish an island, and then there'll be a mini arc sort of introducing what else is happening in the world at that time. Sometimes that works really, really well. I mean, for the most part, it works really, really well. But I think that those moments could also be used for the start of chapter little one-shot stories, mainly to figure out like the fates of some characters, because like after Wano, like Big Mom and Kaido, like what happened to them? It's not super clear what happened to them. We know Big Mom's not dead because Nami's still using Zeus, so I assume that the fruit power doesn't end unless the user's dead, so you can roughly assume that Zeus is still alive, and in which case Kaido probably is as well. But like, where are they? Are they chained up somewhere? How do you chain up two of the emperors? Do you chain them up together? Did Big Mom go back to Whole Cake Island? But that also doesn't make much sense, because you'd think that Big Mom would still have rage and running around rampant. It's very odd, and I feel like we will probably get answers about this, but I think a couple little scenes every now and again would be good to confirm or deny if characters lived, died, where are they now? Like, we got that with Doflamingo. We know that he's in prison. So it'd be interesting to get a couple more tidbits here or there, and I do think the start of chapter little one-shot things are the perfect place to put them. In the anime, it would just be like a compilation episode, honestly. But yeah, that's probably the main criticism that I have of the franchise, is just the amount of characters and not enough time to see them all. So it is praise and criticism at the same time. But my other minor gripes are just some arcs just don't work as well as others. Some arcs are too long, some arcs are too short, and some characters just do not land. Case in point, Hody Jones and Foxy just did not work. Really hated that. That was the most frustrating part of reading day to day, is that I'm stuck on something that I'm not fully enjoying for whoever knows how long that arc runs. And that was probably the worst part of it. Sometimes ending on a cliffhanger was annoying, but in general I was fine with it. But for the positives of One Piece, because I want to keep it equal, I'll probably just talk about my biggest praise for it, which is how much of the series feels planned. And while I don't think every single tidbit that Oda has sprinkled throughout the last few years and things like that was 100% planned from the very beginning, I do think that he's definitely the type of author that wrote the ending first and is started at the beginning, so that you always know where you're going to end up, so they can work towards it. And throughout, as he's writing, we'll just talk about pre-time skip for now, he is sprinkling little breadcrumbs throughout to see if he wants to return to that plot point at another time. So a lot of it works as just general world building, but eventually, if he feels like it, will come back and it will mean even more. So like a lot of the stuff with Skypiea, with the poneglyphs and things like that, that feels like it was generally planned from the beginning, but certain tribes, races, the way the islands connect together, the way the government structure works, little callbacks to certain characters and smaller references. I feel like some of that was like built up previously in case he wants to revisit it at another time, and that's perfectly fine too. It is actually very, very clever writing, is that throw everything at the wall, and then if it becomes relevant, let's return to it. But I believe the general timeline and story of One Piece was built from the very beginning. Like, I don't think Vegapunk was initially written to be exactly how Egghead ended up turning out. But by sprinkling hints of Vegapunk throughout the narrative up until that point, we'd already built up an idea of who this character was. And if and when Oda would ever introduce them, we already had an idea of them, and we're like, oh, he planned it from the very beginning, and that's how it works. And I think that that is a very, very good way to structure the entire franchise. So for sure, he already knows what the One Piece is, because who wouldn't at the point of being the author? But the path to get there, I think, was something that was built along the way over many, many years. And yeah, in general, the entire franchise is an absolutely amazing monolith in the manga and anime industry. It's going to be weird when it does eventually finish, and you're going to be wondering like what the next big thing is. Will Oda make another series? Can he make another series? He's been doing this for most of his life at this point, so who knows if he'll continue. He won't need to continue, but he might have another story left in him. But I think that now is the time to get into One Piece. It's been pretty much as a franchise at its peak for the last few years, and I think that now is a really, really good time to enter, because it feels like we will be learning what the One Piece is sooner rather than later. We are definitely within in like finale-ish territory at the moment, but that could be another year or two, who knows. But I feel like getting into One Piece now is important, because once they reveal what the One Piece is, everyone will know what it is. And it'll be hard for anime viewers not to figure out or get spoiled by it, obviously, but once it's in the manga, most people will know it. Once it's in the anime, everyone will know it. And then starting the franchise after knowing what it is will ruin it. In not that it'll be a bad series, but you'll always have in the back of your head reading, oh, I know the One Piece is this and it links to this, da 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 da. So you'll always be reading it that this thing exists and it is X item or whatever it may be. And I think that that is an interesting way to get into the franchise, because you'll get a lot of people that have never watched it, and at the point of it's finished or they've revealed what the One Piece is, people will get in. And it'll just be an interesting thing to view the series through the lens of knowing what the treasure is at the end of the journey. But it'll never be the same. So if you get into it now, you'll be discovering the secret along with everyone else. It'll feel like things aren't spoiled. And generally, incredible thing about the One Piece manga and the discourse around One Piece is that not a lot of things got spoiled. Like, you know roughly what happens, like who joins the crew and what the big fights are, but there's so much nuance in the story and characters that is just not spoiled for me. Like, a lot of the government stuff had no idea about, which is incredible because of how important it is. And I just knew about who joins and who gets in certain fights and who unlocks certain abilities. But all of the story around all of these sequences, just pretty much none of it was spoiled, which is incredible. So that is really important. I doubt that the actual identity of what the One Piece is, what it looks like, how big it is, whatever the concept is, once that is revealed, I think that's going to be one of the things that people will announce, scream from the mountains. It'll be terrible to go on social media for at least a month after that. It's one of those things where I think if you're along for the ride now, it'll be really, really awesome to learn what it is along with everyone else. Similar feeling that I have to when I was reading Attack on Titan, and it was sort of like trying to figure out what's in the basement, and it was a big like thing where everyone was trying to come up with theories of what it could be, what it will be, if there's nothing there, if they ever come back to it. And it was such a cool payoff when they finally did. And I felt like that was an absolute highlight of it as a media, where I actually came away very satisfied with what the conclusion was, because I didn't think that's what would be there. And once you know what's there and you watch the series again, it's very, very different. And so I think One Piece will be a similar thing. If you know what the One Piece is going in, then you'll view it way differently. Yeah, that's my main recommendation. I think if you're going to get into One Piece, probably get into it now before it finishes, just because I think that there will be something special in that moment when everyone learns what the treasure is. But I don't think that there's too much more for me to talk about. I mean, honestly, I could talk for a long time about the different arcs, different characters, and all sorts, what my overall thoughts are about the series currently, how I feel about the current arc, how I feel about the previous arc, world building, villains, everything like that. But I wanted to keep this very journalized and fairly succinct. So I wanted to talk about my thoughts and feelings about the franchise now that I've caught up. So my main criticism of it, as well as my main praise for it, and what I think people should do from here on out if they're thinking of getting into the franchise themselves. So I think keeping it at those small points is probably the best way for this video, and I think it's best for the viewer. And it's been a while since I've done long form content, and I don't really like to melt too much while I do these, but it is what it is. This will be an interesting path going forward. I will continue reading One Piece. When there is a giant moment, I'm sure I will be making a video about it. But for now, this is the end of the One Piece a Day journey. It might not have been my most popular video series, but it was something I wanted to do, and I wanted to keep a document of it, similar to how I'm doing like the daily shorts this year, just because I want to do something that is cumulative and cool. It's just a small challenge to myself. It can be good content, bad content, but as long as I'm just making something, I think it's nice to do. And that's my thoughts and feelings towards this entire little social experiment. It didn't pan out the way I wanted it to, but I enjoyed my time nonetheless. It didn't really matter if people were watching. I was reading, I was enjoying it, and I had fun catching up to this franchise. I'm so happy my opinions completely changed about One Piece, because from the outside looking in, I was always, oh, Dragon Ball Z versus One Piece, it can only be one or the other, and it is not that way. You can enjoy as much media as you want, you can hate as much media as you want as well, but there's no reason why you should be bitter against something else that's successful and lives in its own little space. And it's just a fun ride from start to finish, the good and the bad, and I highly recommend reading One Piece.